This coming spring is gonna be crazy. Not because anything new has caught my eye like Frieren or Solo Leveling, but rather because the number of peak anime returning is unbelievable. Never have I seen so many sequels come out at the same time before. It's like every studio just planned to release their best anime together for some reason. Without me even including the new Demon Slayer or My Hero Season 7, there's still 8 other amazing anime that are returning next month. Enough that there might not even be enough time to check out the 10 other isekai and fantasy coming out along with it. Just in case you want to anyway though, here's a breakdown of every isekai and fantasy coming out next season. But first, there's a pretty cool sci-fi fantasy that just came out on Netflix, and it turns out it's actually based on a web novel and webcomic. The series is called The Three-Body Problem, and it's a sci-fi epic dealing with aliens, the rise and fall of civilization, and Earth's own capacity to handle such things. For me, it's all concepts that I'm personally very interested in, so if you want to see the full extent of what this supposedly unadaptable story has to offer, then you can do so right here with today's sponsor, Web Novel. It's the #1 place to read popular power fantasies like Solo Leveling or The Eminence in Shadow, or discover new series like The Three-Body Problem here. This is a phenomenal sci-fi fantasy that's a little bit different, but I wouldn't be recommending it if I didn't think you'd like it. Reason being that its take on an alien invasion is heavily rooted in realism. Just like how Mushoku Tensei approaches the isekai genre with a very human perspective, so too does The Three-Body Problem do that with humanity's approach to aliens and an all-out war with them. Consider it like Arrival mixed with Interstellar and a little bit of Contact. It's a really amazing story with a truly unparalleled amount of depth to it. So, whether you want to read the comic or check out other series just like it, you can find thousands of fantasy, sci-fi, and isekai all here on Web Novel. Just click the link down in the description, download Web Novel, then search for The Three-Body Problem. Starting with the sequels, I'm sure it's no surprise that both Mushoku Tensei and Tensura are returning. I've talked about both in numerous videos before, and they're the series I'm planning to cover all the way to August. So if you want to see cut content and lore videos on either, then feel free to subscribe since that's going to be my entire existence for a bit. As for what these two will cover, Mushoku Tensei is picking things up right after Rudy's proposal to Sylphie. It'll be a bit more of that slice-of-life romance we got in the first part, but end on something a lot more exciting towards the end of it. Tensura is doing its 3rd season 24 episodes straight, so unlike Mushoku Tensei and its split-core 2-part season, from April to August we'll be getting non-stop Rimuru. The first bit will cover the hype showdown between Rimuru and Hinata, then after that an event known as the Founding Festival. It's 2 great arcs that are definitely worth looking forward to. One that might need a recap since it has been 2.5 years since the last season. Next is Konosuba Season 3, and aside from the usual antics we're used to with Kazuma and his party, the arc we're heading into is the Kazuma's little sister arc. Not his actual sister or anyone related to him, but a younger princess who he starts treating as if she was his younger sister. This gets him invited into the royal castle, and that in turn allows him to start living like royalty. A change to his quality of life that I'm sure you don't need me to tell you how much he enjoys. Now, one important thing to note about the production of this season is that Studio Drive will be doing it instead of Studio Dean. Drive was responsible for the spin-off last year, so if you enjoyed the quality of that, then that's pretty much what you can expect from this. Moving on to the fantasy that aren't isekai, first we have the second part to the misfit of Demon King's Academy's 2nd season. A season that literally had to restart from the 7th episode, but is now finally being concluded with what I hope is no delays this time. Part 1 just finished the Great Spirit arc, so Part 2 I would suspect is the Selection Trial arc. It's a 2-part story in which one has the Demon and Hero Academies teaming up, while the other is Anos fighting in a trial to become the proxy of the gods. He's been chosen as one of the 8 representatives worthy of the position, so the last one standing will of course be the most worthy. It's an interesting sounding arc that I hope is just more of what we all liked from the 1st season. You know, Anos flexing on literally everyone. A more sci-fi based fantasy coming out along with it is Mahoka Season 3, which will finally continue the main story for it. The last core installment was the Visitor arc from 2020, but it was in between all that we got a movie, a prequel, and a spin-off. The spin-off was just a retelling of Season 1 from the perspective of a different character, the prequel a flashback taking place during Tatsuya and Miyuki's middle school years, then the movie a direct continuation to the Visitor arc. I wouldn't deem the spin-off or prequel as necessary, but if you want the full experience of what Mahoka has to offer, then at the very least you should try and watch the prequel. The end of the movie is likely where Season 3 will start from, so that's something you should probably watch too. As for what Season 3 will cover, I suspect it'll bring us to the Double Seven, Steeplechase, and Ancient City arcs. A series of events that starts with Tatsuya's second year, but will also bring us to another one of those iconic 9 schools competitions. Perhaps we might be able to see more of this. These next two I'm not quite familiar with, but I know Kurumi stans are rejoicing for Dead Alive Season 5, a 12-episode installment that could very well be the last season for it. After being tossed around from studio to studio, it looks like Geek Toys is committing to finally finishing it up for us. Unfortunately, that'll probably come with the jarring CGI Season 4's fights we're plagued with, but I suppose that's better than waiting 5+ years for it. The other series is Black Butler's public school arc, and this too is finally returning after 7 long years without anything for it. Combine this with the fact Spice and Wolf's remake is coming this season too, and we pretty much have the best of 2008 all over again. In any case, Black Butler will be covering the 7th arc of the series, and unlike A1 Pictures, who was the studio responsible for it before, this time it'll be Studio Cloverworks. This of course means much of the staff will be different, but fortunately the core cast has remained the same. Now, it's hard to believe Spice and Wolf is returning too, but here we are in a season where Hollow has been remade right in front of us. I can't say Studio Passion is the one I would have wanted for it, but I suppose any adaptation is better than none. I mean, who knows? Maybe this studio will adapt the series further than the last one did. Animation aside though, with director Takahashi returning as the man in charge, I imagine the show will be in good hands since he was responsible for the last one. Combine this with Kevin Penkin doing the OST, and I already know regardless of what's on screen, I'm gonna be fully immersed with it. The voice actors are all the same as well, so I'm honestly cautiously optimistic with what to expect for this. There's been no confirmation as to how many episodes and how long it'll be airing for, but we can only hope we get as many as the original did. Either way, I'm just excited to see Lawrence and Hollow talk about economics again. With that being all the returning isekai and fantasy, now we can finally talk about the new ones. There's not really too many I would say I'm personally looking forward to, but perhaps some might appeal to you. That said, first we have Chilling in Another World with my level 2 super cheat powers, and this is the standard story where the summoned hero is abandoned by the kingdom that summoned him. His stats were too weak to be deemed usable, so just like in Shield Hero, he's exiled for being useless. Then, just as you'd expect, it's once he hits level 2 that's when he becomes OP. Using his newfound powers to defeat every enemy he comes across, then for some reason has them live with him in a series of short stories centered around a revolving door of side characters. The plot isn't so much a power fantasy with a hardcore adventure, but is instead just a chill slice of life with a bit of romance. It's a series I'm curious to see if JC's staff can turn into something better than what the source material lets on for it. Next we have Tensei Kizoku, which is pretty much a combination of Tensei Oji and Realist Hero. It's an isekai where the protagonist's main power is his appraisal skill, and as such will use it to recruit a very useful cast of characters. Since he can see any person's current strength and potential, he can basically determine who's best at what, and that in turn makes planning for war a whole lot easier. He'll recruit what's pretty much the Avengers, then use them to stabilize his nation and secure his borders. I can't say it's anything we haven't seen before, but from the trailers alone it does look like Studio Mother might be able to make a decent adaptation out of this. Now, the last isekai before we get to the straight up fantasy is the New Gate and its hybrid approach to power fantasy. What I mean is that it's kinda like a weird mix between Overlord and SAO. SAO because the story begins with our protagonist trapped in an online life or death game, then Overlord because after he beats said game he wakes up in the game's world for real. It's 500 years later and he's the only player who didn't escape after beating it. Having been the one who beat the final boss though, his power is at a level that makes him a literal god amongst these NPCs now turned sentient. So it's kinda like if end of series Kirito was isekai'd into the world of Aincrad for real. Now, those are the only 3 we have for isekai, but there is one reincarnation anime called I Was Reincarnated as the 7th Prince, so I took my time perfecting my magical ability. It's a fairly straightforward fantasy involving a sorcerer reincarnated as a prince, and the whole plot is the prince using his second life to become better at magic. In his past life, he wasn't satisfied with the level of power he had, but in this new one now, he's able to master as many magics as possible. This in turn results in him becoming quite the OP individual, and that, as you'd expect, makes every conflict have the exact same outcome. So all in all, it's a generic power fantasy centered around magic. Your typical isekai plot, just in a slightly different setting. The other reincarnation anime is Re-Monster, and this is a standard fantasy RPG in which the human finds himself reincarnated as a goblin now. This means he has to adapt to the harsh life being a monster comes with, but at the same time it allows him to get stronger since gaining XP is possible now. It suits well for his cool tactical mindset and is pretty much the classic level up anime but from the monster's perspective. It's a slight change that could very well make this interesting, but for now I'm just getting Rimuru if he was a goblin vibes. Next is Unnamed Memory, and this is one of 2 fantasy romances we'll be getting this season. This one seems a bit more serious in nature since the elements it deals with aren't the typical lighthearted daily adventure stuff we usually see. No, this is actually a large overarching plot centering around an unlikely relationship and the development of said relationship. There's the prince who's cursed to never have a wife, then there's the witch he meets that he hopes can break that curse. One is a strong, competent knight who's very skilled with the sword, while the other is the strongest witch ever thought to have existed. They both meet under unexpected circumstances, and it's that meeting that makes the prince think, why not just make this witch his wife? This leads the two to live together in the royal castle, and it's as they do that we get to learn more about their pasts, the dark secrets both have come to live with, and how it is those secrets affect their blossoming relationship. So, if you're looking for a complementary dynamic between 2 strong characters, then Unnamed Memory might be worth checking out for you. There's a few intriguing plot elements that work to its advantage as well. We just gotta hope that the anime can get to them. The other fantasy romance is an Archdemon's Dilemma, and this is about a sorcerer who falls in love with an elven slave girl he comes across. The sorcerer is socially inept and unable to express how he feels, while the elf girl has been through trauma and is simply unable to feel. This makes both characters incapable of interacting properly, and it's that dynamic that's pretty much the focal point for this. It's a slow build-up of how the two eventually come to understand each other. A wholesome tale of love within a standard world of fantasy. Next, we have the banished former hero lives as he pleases, and this is about as simple as the title makes it out to be. The former hero reincarnates in order to avoid all the struggles of being a hero, but it's when he's exiled for being useless that he immediately starts doing things that a hero would do. It is technically him living the way that he wants to, but unlike how you'd expect, all that entails is pretty much the same stuff he was doing before. So, as far as basic power fantasies go, it seems this is about as basic as they get. It's the hero fighting monsters and saving the princess. The only difference is he's doing it on his own time. Something that looks a bit more interesting is Studio Liden Film's adaptation of God's Game We Play, a no game, no life type series in which humanity's best gamer must represent them in a series of brain games crafted by the gods. Not once has humanity ever been able to win them, but perhaps this time humanity's representative can. It's the series I'm personally looking forward to the most, since I'm always a sucker for anime where the protagonist outsmarts their opponent. I'm also excited to see all the different types of games they'll play. Now, last but not least is the reverse isekai of Henjin no Salad Bowl, a comedic fantasy about a detective who starts living with a magical princess from another world. The princess slowly starts to get used to her new life in Japan, and it's the dynamic between her and her roommate that will probably be this series' focal point. There's not much else to say other than that, but I can imagine a few interesting scenarios revolving around a medieval princess getting accustomed to modern day society. But yeah, that's pretty much every isekai and fantasy coming out next season. If any of them caught your eye, then be sure to let me know down in the comments which of them you'll be watching this season. Now, before I go, don't forget that the Level Up collection is still available for the next week or so if you want to secure yours, then be sure to do so using the link in the description. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!